Namaskar. Welcome to this session of weekly dialogues in Jaipur Dialogues. And today we have a very special guest all the way from the USA. And you must have heard about him, Mr. Nilesh Neelkant Oak.
Namaskar,
Welcome,
Sanjay
Nilesh
ji.
ji. How are you?
Namaskar, Sanjay ji. How are you?
Namaskar. And all of our viewers are eagerly waiting for you. In fact, when you came to Jaipur Dialogues in January, at that time, a lot of people complained to me why you did not webcast it live. And there was a lot of interest in seeing you live in that particular session. Afterwards, of course, when we did the recording, when we ran the recording, that was also very well received. So let me introduce you to the audience, though most of the Jaipur Dialogues people do know about you. There will be many new people. Nilesh ji is otherwise an engineer who left his job and started taking interest in Indic research. And in Indic research, he's done a phenomenal job. He's become what I've coined a new word. I call it a chronologist. So he's become he's re-established Indic chronology. And why Indic chronology is important is because when we do when we discuss the Aryan invasion theory, then you realize why chronology is so important, especially for the Westerners, and why it is so important for Westerners to destroy this chronology. And he has assigned dates to the Mahabharata war. He has assigned dates to the Ramayana era, and he is now working extensively. So already come out with his assertion, he's come out with his theory about the Vedas. And he has already has 3 books, one on Mahabharata war, one on Ramayana war, and dating of Ramayana per se, and as also on Bhishma Nirvana. I would request Mr. Nilesh Oak to tell a little bit about, briefly about these ventures.
Okay, Namaskar, Sanjay ji, and Namaskar to all the viewers of Jaipur Dialogue. So when I was there in Jaipur, and I very much enjoyed interacting with people there. So I'll give that quick summary with the same metaphor I used, which is the multiplication of 7. That really people find it easy to remember. Many parents write me telling me that they are using that to teach their children the chronology of Indian history. So I started with Mahabharata, and that started some 25-30 years ago when I was working. And we will talk about how any theory comes into being, what's the purpose of any theory. But so essentially it started with one specific problem, very unique problem of Mahabharata text. And I thought very naively that I'm going to solve it over a weekend or something. This was back in 1995. I was in Canada and doing my master's in chemical engineering. And then it took me 15 years, from 1995 to 2009. But the long story, making it short, once I solved this mystery of that particular observation called Arundhati Vasishtha, then I became very curious and I started reading the entire Mahabharata, trying to extract all the astronomy evidence. So in summary, I used all the astronomy evidence from the Mahabharata text. It amounts to 300 plus, and solved them in a jigsaw puzzle fashion, and arrived at 5561 BCE as the year of Mahabharata war, which is more than 7,500 years ago, or more than 7,000 years ago. Then I did exactly the same thing for Valmiki Ramayana. I read it. I found more than 600 specific astronomy observations, and again solving them like you solve any puzzle, and arrived at 12,209 BC, which is more than 14,000 years ago. And then in 2016, Professor Balram Singh of Institute of Advanced Sciences, we work together, and he suggested, how about Rigveda? So that's when 2016, I started with Rigveda. Now, interestingly, Rigveda does have astronomy evidence, but I couldn't use it, or at least at that time, I could not find any connections to use it for dating. But to my delight, the hydrology evidence, the river evidence of the morphodynamics of rivers, hydrology, geology, geophysics, geochemistry, that all came together. And in a very short time, I was amazed at myself, I can say. Very short time, I could define a general framework for the timing of Rigveda. Now, this is very careful. It's very important to be careful. What I would say is that the last portions of Rigveda is at the same time as Mahabharata, because we know in Mahabharata, Vyasa edited, recasted. But if you go backwards in antiquity, we know that the oldest portion of Rigveda are definitely older than 22,000 BC. So definitely older than 24,000 years. We don't know how old. So that's my summary.
That's great. Actually, what I'll do is that, because you have already delivered this talk in Jaipur in January, so I will link this in the description section, so that people who are really interested in finding about these theories of yours, they can go back to that talk and then they can discover it there, and they can have a look. It's a very detailed talk, almost 2 hours.
Yes.
And I think the talk portion itself is about 1.5 hours. So viewers, that you can watch there. One of the crucial elements when we set about determining the knowledge portion of our scriptures, or knowledge portion for that matter of anything, even of sciences, is what is called the logic system. And when you talk about your methodology, which is based on logic, which is based on scientific evidence, and which is based on tark. So logic and tark, of course, are very much interrelated. So how do you look at the logic that that is followed in India and the logic that is followed in the West, which actually has its roots in the Abrahamic religions, going right back to Aristotle?
Right.
And as we say in common language, we say the binary logic versus multi-valued logic, so 3-way logic, 4-way logic. Generally, it's all Greek and Roman to people. So I would request you to first explain why using a particular framework of logic is important in understanding that text. Now, this is what we see, because the Westerners, they start looking at the Indian scriptures, the Vedas or the epics, from that particular Western lens of what is called the binary logic, yes or no, true or false. And then they make a mincemeat of the entire Indian scripture or scriptural system. Professor Subhash Kak has given a wonderful example in this. I remember he takes the first Rigveda Sutra, Om Agnimile Purohitam, Yagyasya Devam Ritvajam Hotaram Rat Dhatamam. And then he compares the translations done by the Westerners, where Yagya becomes sacrifice and Ratna becomes jewels or gems, and Agni is fire, and then they're related to sacrifice, without realizing that Agni Tattva and fire are something totally different. So with this background, I would request you to explain a little bit about the difference in the logic systems. I also had, there's a mathematical proof. Professor Kak gave it to me, which proves mathematically that ternary logic is far superior to binary logic. And you, of course, been dealing with the 4-valued logic, the Chatushkoti, quite a lot. So please make it simple for the viewers.
Okay, I'll come to Chatushkoti logic in a minute, but let me go through few layers, based on what you ask. what you will find something unique, and this is indeed unique, about all the Indian ancient narratives. So whether you take Ramayana, whether you take Mahabharata, whether you take Rigveda, or any of a specific grantha, the grantha itself means the knot, okay? Now, how to solve the knot? And the beauty of very unique feature, as I said, is that every single ancient narrative, I would say most of it, there could be exceptions, most of the Indian ancient narratives provide exactly how to study them, how to unknot them, untwist them right inside the book. So for example, Mahabharata will tell you what this book is about, how to study it, what is its purpose, and all of it. Same thing with Ramayana, what was its purpose, why it was written, how it should be used, what are the benefits, and so on. So that it's a complete system by themselves. Same thing with Bhagavad Gita. Even if you take that, which is a portion of Mahabharata, it tells you what the purpose of the book is, what it's going to do for you, and so on and so forth. Now let's talk about the differences in the logic system. So for in the West, it's like a logic is like a separate branch. What you will find in the Indian system is that, of course, it has been explored extensively under, for example, say Nyaya Shastra or Nyaya Darshana. But you will find elaborate exploration of this into any other book. So you will find that in Mahabharata, Ramayana, you will find that into the Ayurveda books like Charak Samhita. Very, very impressive. So what's a big difference? You mentioned binary versus other systems. The Western logic, for most part, is a binary logic. You also refer to Greeks, going to Plato and Socrates and whatnot. See, if you look at the Western history of a science or scientific method, you'll find many interesting things, funny things. If you go to Greeks, what you find is their approach essentially was introspective and conjectural, which is also wrong. There are good elements to both. Okay, introspective is good, conjectural is good, but that's wrong. Then even as late as, I'm talking 19th century, okay, I mean after Copernicus, Newton, and all of these individuals, the great scientists of the West are still talking of now conjectural, okay, and inductive. Now that is also problematic. Now people in the West also do understand, especially after Sir Karl Popper, the greatest philosopher of science in my mind, or most of the people's mind.
Yes,
Now,
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Karl Popper has had a great influence. I mean, this
Yeah.
theory of falsification has unknotted many knots.
Huh.
वो
And so,
ग्रंथियां खोल दी हैं उन्होंने ग्रंथियां बहुत सारी खोली.
Correct. And so what he talks about, he brings the two, one from Greek and one from the latest modern science, you can say, of the last 500 years, which is conjectural and experimental. Now, here is the beauty. If we come to Nyaya Darshana is talking about this conjectural and experimental for thousands of years. Thousands of years. That is finally they arrived at this, and they're talking of this. Now let's go into the Chatushkoti logic for a minute. Before that, so if you look at modern science, there are 5 elements to it. So to solve a problem, you propose a theory, and once you propose a theory, that theory makes predictions, and you take those predictions and you do the comparison of those predictions with experiments, simulations, actual observations, and so on, the life, the nature. And if they match, you accept the theory. So Sir Karl Popper described this as a triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing in the context of a theory and in the context of a background knowledge. Okay, now what he is saying, and it is a great stuff, and it has been like seen as like the great invention. If you just look at one of the 16 elements of Nyaya Darshana, like Avayav, it talks of Pratijna, Hetu, Udaharana, Upanaya, and Nigaman. It is nothing but these 5 steps. And we have not scratched the surface of what Nyaya Darshana is. Okay, now let me bring you to this Chatushkoti logic and how we can look at any claims and divide them into 4 buckets. Okay, so I'm going to share my PowerPoint screen with you for a second. Okay, so let's share the screen. Okay, do you see the screen?
It's just coming on.
Okay.
Coming on.
Let me know when you see it.
Yeah. Now it's
Okay.
on, and I
All-
can see the screen.
All right. So the 5 things of modern science, or of course the avayava of Nyaya Darshana that I talked about. So out of that, I'm taking 2. One is the evidence or explanation, and the third one is the objective testability. So vertical axis is the evidence axis, and the horizontal axis is testability. What it does, immediately it takes any claim, okay, and we have got now 4 possibilities. We can split them. We can put that claim into one of these 4 possibilities. So let's quickly understand this. The testability, if it's a yes, what does that mean is the claim in principle can be scientific. There is no guarantee. Just because something is objectively testable by itself does not mean it's purely scientific, because it can be objectively testable but illogical.
Right.
We have to ask if they have taken all the evidence into account, or are they being
Right.
very selective, okay, selective, arbitrary, and so on. The other side is metaphysical, and this is also a great contribution of Indian Nyaya Darshana. For example, in the West, for a long time, I would say especially until Karl Popper, the problem was always like either it's scientific or it is not scientific or unscientific. And that was never a problem in the Indian Darshana system. For example, if something is not objectively testable, that doesn't make it unscientific. That makes it metaphysical, atarkya.
Okay.
Right? And so as the technology and science improves, something that say we could not test say 400 years ago, now we can test it. For example, take Pushpak Viman of Ramayana for a second. 400 years ago or 500 years ago, people would have said, what are you talking?
Even today they say that.
Unfortunately, right? I mean, well, what can you do to their intellect, right? Yes, you're right. You're right. Today when they say that. But let me just complete this, and I'll come back to, from this. So now this split it into 4 different categories. Like, one is the Chatushkoti logic here. So both true and false. Okay. And then neither true nor false, then true or false. And how can we take these people from these 3 other quadrants, let's say, to the quadrant of a truth, or the best approximation to the truth? We can briefly discuss that. But one of the things that you will hear is anytime you hear the word Shraddha, like faith or reverence, the so-called pseudoscientists have a problem with it.
They have problem with both Sanshaya and Shraddha.
Right? And how sad is this? Because, see, if you listen to the great scientists of the world, like Einstein, Newton, and Kepler and whatnot, this Sanshaya is the basis. I mean, Wigner, Nobel laureate, he says ultimate ignorance, is very much a necessity for the progress of science. The Sanshaya comes from that.
Actually, the problem with the binary logic is that it is looking for some kind of a sledgehammer kind of a solution, whereas the solutions even in the scientific world, as we have seen, are basically evolutions.
Yes, and it's evolution in an iterative fashion.
Right.
It sort of goes in a circle, and not to make it complicated, but Karl Popper's formula again is a P1 TT P2. He says you start with the problem. To solve this, you propose a theory, then you do the experiments and eliminate the error. So now that theory is established, but it doesn't solve everything. It creates a problem of higher complexity, and now you have to propose the next theory to go there. So you're right. It goes in a evolutionary fashion. All right. So if I can show you, so that Shraddha, I said, it's a very much a necessity, and as you said, Sanshaya also. For example, Sage Gautama or even Jain Nyaya Darshana, like they also
Jain Nyaya Darshana is 7 valued. That's very complicated.
Right. And they added some more. And of course, I mean, they existed, but sometimes not explicitly stated. But the one that you mentioned, for example, this part of the Avayava, the 5-step system, the Indian Nyaya Darshana has a jidnyasa, like curiosity. You don't do this thing just for the heck of it. You do it because if you solve the problem, it's going to lead to growth of knowledge. And then the Sanshaya, then they are this Nyaya school is extremely realist school. hard reality, hardcore realist, you can say. So even in solving problems, they are very practical and pragmatic. The one word that is used in this avayava, the 10-step avayava, is a shakya prapti. With the available evidence, they want to see what can be tested and what
Right.
can be found out. So then they knew also the limitations of knowledge.
Right.
Yeah. So do you want me to complete this slide, and then we can come
Yes,
back
I mean,
also?
can you just show Sanjay in this?
In this one, I will. Yeah.
True
I will
or
show you the
false?
Samshay. Yes. Yeah. So for example, the first one, if you let me just fill it, so maybe you get to see the whole picture, what it is about.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Now, the first quadrant where you saw the both true and false, imagine these people to be, say, just for simplicity, we'll call it, because I use the word Shraddha, say like a devout people, like people who preserved our amazing ancient literature with reverence. Not that they necessarily understood everything about it, not that they understood every mystery of that is there in the book, but someone who may not be astronomer, so may not understand Surya Siddhanta, but he or she will religiously memorize it, religiously copy that text. So they are not worried whether it's a true or false. It could be a mixture of true and false. But they revered it and they preserved it. I call this preservation of tradition, that quadrant. And because they did this great work, now we can analyze it as people analyze in the past. The top right hand corner where you see the truth, like a true prajna, I would say in the scientific fashion at least, that is the desired quadrant. Okay, because we look at all the evidence, we make it all objectively testable, and we reach the nirnay, the discernment, the best approximation to the truth or the truth. Now,
Right.
if you don't use all the evidence, and that happens in many of these so-called scientific but actually pseudo-scientific fields, they will only use selective that suits their agenda,
Okay.
that suits their dogma. But if you don't use this 5-step method, it's going to lead you to the false knowledge. And if people are not careful, they are going to think, hey, something scientific, because people can use the word scientific.
Now let's go to the practical application of the 2-valued, 3-valued, and 4-valued logic. Of course, people would have heard about quantum logic and fuzzy logic as well. So those are, I may like to tell that those are the examples of multi-valued logic. But of course, this is not the place to discuss them in detail. That's just a piece of information. Now, the difficult question that people face in everyday life, which if they learn this logic, becomes really easy actually. When I learned this logic, then I found differentiating at least between the different religious systems and the dharmic systems very easy. Because otherwise sometimes it got very difficult, especially in the Indian system. If you do not understand the 3-valued or 4-valued logic, then a lot of times things do not make sense. Because when you have a 3-valued logic, and you can approach, say, a scripture like Mahabharata from 3 different points of view, that you can approach them from the mind, from the intellect, and from the higher consciousness, then each time things become different. So why do the multi-valued logic systems produce tolerant societies, whereas the 2-valued or the binary logic systems produce largely intolerant societies? And it's only when the whole, like even if you look at the Renaissance in the Christianity, and it was only when that the binary was loosened a little bit. Though when you look at the Western philosophers, then especially in their relation to the Eastern scriptures, they simply do not seem to be able to get away from that binary system.
Very true.
So this is the question that often exercises people, and I think in the light of the differences in the approaches to these logics, you are best placed to explain it.
Right. Now, I mean, great question, and actually that's a loaded discussion, frankly. So I'll give few highlights, few insights. No, absolutely great question. So you mentioned first the binary logic and how that has an effect on world religions. Okay. The advantage of a multi-logic, and let me mention another point that you mentioned about, say, Mahabharata, for example, that one can study from a different perspective, like a mind perspective, from a niti dharma perspective, from an achar samhita perspective, right? And then social cultural aspects, and then scientific aspects. I mean, it can be studied from many different angles. So those layers are frankly not even there in this multi system logic. I mean, we will use the exactly same system that I'm showing on the screen. But then when you go into different realms, you might use a different tool. I mean, that's just natural, right? I mean, if something related to heart, we use certain tools, and something related to studying brain, we use different tools. And that's why the Indian system has those 6 darshanas, so Vaisheshika Nyaya, they kind of go together. Then we have the Sankhya and Yoga, and then Purva Mimamsa, Uttar Mimamsa. We will not go there today. So there are these different layers also. But looking at this, the very reason there is a distinct difference between the Indian, the dharma system, I'm just using the word for lack of anything, I don't want to call it religion, versus...
Yes, it is not religion, basically, because in religion, unless it is a binary system, it cannot be a religion, basically.
There you go. Because really that liga is a connect, connect based on a one principle, which means everyone who doesn't agree to that principle is outsider. So that's that binary logic for the religious system. And so why the your question was why the multi-logic approach leads to a tolerance. One of the reason is the first ingredient of a multi-logic system, again, we can use Nyaya Darshana as a reference, is that no claim, the no claim super, like metaphysical claim or even a worldly claim, like a very physical science claim, is intrinsically valid. That is the basis of Nyaya Darshana. No claim is intrinsically valid until it is validated. This is not to say that you cannot accept a word of an expert. You can accept the word of an expert. We do that all the time. If I'm visiting Jaipur and I want to know how to go to the Pink City, I can ask for a direction to Panwala, and I can follow that perfectly fine, right? Nothing wrong with it. So, but it is in the context. And so no claim is intrinsically valid, and that's what it brings us to. Any claim, you can very quickly analyze it and say, where does it fall into these 4 buckets? Once you initially do that Purva Paksha and it sits somewhere, now you can help that person. So if we are talking religions, actually assuming they are the other person is willing to get the help, the Chatushkoti logic can help them from wherever they are, to basically synthesize that all 4. And the modern example I'll give, and we can stop on this slide. Modern example I'll give is quantum mechanics. Right. See, quantum mechanics as a phenomenon is a real. It has been extremely useful. It has been used just like Ayurveda. Not every theory, every principle of Ayurveda can be tested in this fashion. Not everything, What Ayurveda calls Ushna doesn't mean like a temperature hot, It has many different meanings to it. But some of the things can be tested. But back to quantum mechanics, it is useful. We know that it is real. But as to what is the truly underlying scientific principle, we have not understood. And so again, there is a multi-logic system that is coming in. There are these theories of multiple universe. I mean, if you hear that, you say, what crazy stuff going on? But that perfectly fits into this Chatushkoti logic. And therefore, there are right now some 14 different mutually conflicting theories of quantum mechanics.
Right.
All right. If you can,
the theory of quantum mechanics, but the great difficulty, because quantum is the science of very small and the relativity, the science of the very large, it is also become impossible for the physics to move further without integrating the two. And that has stalled the growth of physics for almost 60, 70 years. This is for the viewers' knowledge, just giving them this piece of a little bit of information. See, I have analyzed this whole phenomenon in the context of Dharma and the Abrahamic religions. And we find that in the Abrahamic religions, they're just simply two binaries, true and false. Whatever is written in the book is true, and whatever is not there in the book is false. Whereas those who follow the ternary logic or the four-valued logic, or even say the higher valued logics like the Syadvad of the Jaina Dharma, for them, as you said, there is no unless you actually experience the truth, there is no final terminal point. And that gives them that tolerance to look at everybody's point of view.
Yes.
And that is where, when we discuss the epistemology of various religions, and then we find that because of the four-valued logic, the proof system of the Indians, the Dharma, is far larger. They are able to look at things in much broader and with much more open mind. And whereas the Western religions, for them, the proof system is also constricted into true and false. There is nothing,
Yes.
whatever is there in the book is true, whatever is there not in the book is false.
Right.
And that creates that kind of intolerance that says that, okay, there's a lot of angst going out against racism right now in the US. And what is the concept behind racism? Racism says that, okay, one color is superior, or the one ethnicity is superior, the other is inferior. But imagine religions. Just imagine what they say. Their binary is that the other religion is, or the other religions, or the other faiths, they are not simply inferior, they are satanic.
Correct. Correct.
And it comes from the book, and there is no way you can counter it, because whatever is there in the book is true.
Yeah.
Word is God, ultimately.
Yeah.
So that, according to me, is one of the fundamental reasons why there is so much intolerance in the binary kind of situations, and why multivariate situations can practice greater inclusivity and greater tolerance. I remember one very famous, I think I mentioned it to you once, that there was an old lady, and I was, I think, a young subdivisional magistrate, and there was something, that we were talking about why theft is bad. And she said something which actually shook me completely upside down. She said that हमारे तो भगवान भी चोर थे, हमारे तो भगवान भी चोर थे, उनको आप क्या कहोगे? And she was sincere, because she was talking from that internalized multi-valued logic. Theft has to be contextualized. एक बच्चे की शरारत जो है, उसको आप चोरी कहेंगे क्या? But according to the Bible, even that is a great sin.
You are born sinful.
In fact, you are born sinful.
You haven't done anything yet. You are sinful.
You haven't done, you are born sinful. and there's an entire corporate structure worth trillions of dollars that is out there to save you forcibly. So I'd just like to have your comment on this.
Well, I mean, you asked some. I mean, you discussed some amazing questions. Like, sometimes these can go on and on. One thing,
You got only 3-4 minutes more.
That's right. Okay. So, and then I want you to close it rather. So, so you talked of these binaries. See that those binaries started with. I mean, they came in the religion, right? All Abrahamic religions, but also, so just like you talked about the racism, right? Black versus white, but it's also their science versus religion. I mean, you just touch something and it has to divide, into two. You mentioned the wonderful story of a step, and then then the lady said, "Our Bhagwan bhi chor hai." If you see Shankaracharya, right, he sings, "My namaskar to everyone, chorobhyo nama," my namaskar to chor also. Again, yeah, he has that statement, so it comes in the context. And so what you find is, for example, there the Abrahamic religious approach is top down, meaning this is how it is written, this is what it means, it should not be questioned, although of course they go into their convenient interpretations if they have to do it, to fool others. But otherwise it's top down. Now the Chatushkoti, or the multiple logic system, or the Indian system, what it does is it's not against a top down. There are places where top down is the approach. Like, you want to know something about your family, more than likely it's your grandfather and grandmother who are going to tell you about it. Those are the best existing sources. So that in that case, top down makes sense. Similarly, if we are looking at the Indians divided just for a classification purposes, the para and apara, drushta, adrushta. For the science has a problem if they cannot access it. Indian system has no problem studying, analyzing para, but I mean something that you cannot see, something that you cannot experience with your five senses. Even with Antakaran, you have to go into a yoga and meditation. So they had this no problem. And so in that case, what they did is, because say somebody goes into a meditation and has some experience, but every one of us doesn't go into the meditation.
Right.
Even if we go, we don't have that experience.
Right.
So what do we do? In that case, top down is a perfectly good approach, because that person will share what he or she did and what experiences he or she had. Now if we have that Shraddha, we can go and try that and see what experiences we get. So that's a top down. But
Right.
when it comes to the hard realities, if the earth is rotating around the sun or sun is rotating around the earth, the Abrahamic religions went to their books, and that's why that fight between science and religion. Whereas here we said, okay, let's find out. Let's find out. And the last one I'll quickly say, Sanatano Nitya Nutana. That is what Yaskacharya said. The Sanatana, the beauty of Sanatana Dharma is the one, it is capable of refreshing itself with time, place, and circumstances. As the new knowledge comes, we are willing to change. The others are not willing to change.
So I think we can sum it up and say that there is no text without a context. And that is the sum and substance of the Indian logic systems. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nilesh ji. Very wonderful having you here. And I think we will keep expanding on these concepts, because these are the fundamentals, I think, of the Indian systems. And most people do not understand it. So it was very important engaging you on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjay ji. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.